G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with JAZZA. I'm JAZZA and this video is part 2 in my video series on getting the best sound quality for your productions, and in this part we're going to be focusing on optimizing your space. That's right, the quality of the audio in your productions isn't just dependent upon your microphones and your impressive software. It's in very large part dependent upon the quality of your acoustic environment, and we're going to talk about how you can optimize your space to get the best sound possible and on a budget. I want to start off by thanking Rode Microphones for sponsoring this series of videos. They have an amazing range of innovative and extremely high quality microphones. They vary from being affordable while still high quality and hugely amazingly high production value microphones as well. So I recommend checking them out and thank them for providing the microphones that I'm demonstrating through the course of this series. I also need to disclaim once again that I am not an audio engineer or a professional audio technician. I'm just a self-taught guy who does lots of different stuff that involves lots of different audio stuff, and over the last 10 years I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping to provide some interesting information through the course of this video series. So there are two key components we're going to talk about in optimizing your space. The first is soundproofing and the second is acoustic treatment. People often get these things mixed up and think of them as one and the same thing, but they're actually very different, and I'm going to define them for you and explain what they are or what they mean. If a room or an environment is soundproof, it means it's optimized to reduce the outside influence of sound outside of that room or space, and to also optimize the sound in that room from escaping. Examples of things that contribute to the soundproofing quality of a room could be things like thick concrete walls, noise reductive windows, or thick insulation. These are all things that help reduce the outside noise from entering inside that space. It also does the opposite, which makes your neighbors happy if you have a garage band and you're making lots of loud noises, but the noise isn't escaping and irritating them on a Sunday afternoon. It's also important to note that while soundproofing is a key component of producing great quality sound, if you have noise producing things inside the room you're recording, that's gonna make things a little tricky too. Things like fridges and computers and things that produce static can be loud and clear, especially in recordings in small environments with very highly sensitive studio condenser microphones that pick up everything in that room. Acoustic treatment is very different to soundproofing. Acoustic treatment addresses how the sound inside the space bounces and moves around. What this means is that if you're in a room with lots of hard, shiny, flat surfaces, the sound you make is going to bounce around that room several times. And if you're recording inside that room, it's going to sound spacious, echoey, and really unpleasant. To treat a room acoustically by using things like foam and all that stuff, which we'll talk about later, it enables that sound to be absorbed before it returns to the microphone or your source of recording. So in this video today, I'm going to use 3 examples of studio room setups and how I've personally optimized them and how they may help or apply to you. The first example is your average room, and this room is your average room. I've just painted it up and put stuff in it to make it my studio, but really it was a bedroom before I used it for my office. Now this room actually has pretty bad soundproofing. There's a very large window on my left side which actually backs onto a road, so every time cars pass I can hear them clearly in this room. I also have 2 fridges in the room and 2 computers, so the hums are quite difficult to deal with. And I've had these factors working against me in trying to create an optimal sound. I've tried to reduce the outside noise coming into the room by having very large, thick curtains placed in front of the windows. Unfortunately, there's not much more than that I could do rather than starting to actually change the cosmetics of the room itself. So starting to place boards or thick foam between the window and this room. As for the fridges and computer hums, I combat this by having the microphone sources as close to me as possible when recording and then optimizing through production. So rather than having mics that just pick up as much as possible, I try and use directional microphones, and I try and optimize the input level by having very low gain, which means I'm not amplifying noise further away from the microphones, things like my 2 fridges and my computers. Now, acoustic treatment for a room like this was actually the most influential part. This room has hard surfaces everywhere. I have vinyl flooring, which is a hard, shiny, flat surface. All of my walls were empty and had nothing hanging from them, and I actually can't hang anything from my main mural wall because then it would obviously cover the mural. So I have one large flat surface that's always going to have some sound bouncing off of it that I actually can't do anything about. So without addressing these things, the acoustics in the room would be very bad for video recording. Now, while this room isn't a sound studio, it's not soundproof and the acoustic treatment is okay, I'll go through some of the things that I did to acoustically treat my average room to get some fairly optimal audio recordings for my videos and productions. First and foremost, I got a big rug. So I have a nice big thick red rug. It's got a really thick plush to it, which means that it's going to absorb sound a bit better than just a sort of coarse, flatter rug. This was intentional on my part. I got something that's quite fluffy, and that was purely for the purposes of helping absorb sound. Beyond that, if you fill a room with stuff, that alone is going to diffuse the sound in the room. So because I have a desk and computer gear all around the room, these things alone are going to interrupt the way that the sound bounces around the room, but not very efficiently. Really what we're going to need to do in a room like this is diffuse the way that the audio bounces on the walls in particular. Now, this was a tricky one for me because I needed a way to stop the audio bouncing off the walls and back to me, but I also couldn't really cover the walls with much. On the wall directly behind me, I have a pretty mural which is meant to be the backing of all of my videos, which I can't touch or cover. And then on the other side of the room, I have a very large perpetual year calendar, which is another very large, hard, shiny surface that takes up a majority of the wall and is going to bounce sound back. To get around this, I acted as innovatively as possible, and I built a bit of a custom stand in the middle of the room, and on that I'm hanging 2 pieces of acoustic foam. I'm really proud of this rig because it enables me to move the acoustic foam where I need to, which is important because as I move the camera that I'm recording with in different places in the room, that foam is going to need to move out of the shot. So I have the flexibility of being able to move my light acoustic treatment, but I'm also able to move it directly in the path that is going to most affect the sound and the quality of the recording. Now, as you can tell, the audio in this room and the recording of this part of the video isn't perfect. It's not like voice-over production quality, but it's perfectly reasonable for presenting a video on YouTube, which is the primary reason and use for this room. Now, this actually wasn't a very expensive rig at all. The stand was built out of bits and pieces I had lying around, and it only cost me $20 to build the little hanging straps that hold the foam in place. The acoustic foam itself was pretty affordable. I just got some cheap stuff off of eBay, and it does the job perfectly well. But if you're really looking to optimize your space's audio without spending too much money, you can use things like rugs, blankets, and sheets, and these are going to act just as well. They're just not as aesthetically pleasing, but sometimes that doesn't matter. So that's an example as to how I've optimized the soundproofing slightly and the acoustic treatment in a very average space. Next, we're going to talk about really getting as much quality in your recording as possible with a professional studio space and a budget studio space. So now I'm in a room which was built with these 2 things specifically in mind: soundproofing and acoustic treatment. Now, having a high quality room built for sound doesn't have to be an incredibly expensive ordeal. I made this room and it was a budget project. I wanted an additional studio space to work on audio with, to record music, sounds, and to record my weekly tabletop time nerdy role-playing game podcast and stream in. And I built it myself with the help of a friend here or there, and it's all been done with, for the most part, budget materials. I got the timber to build an extra wall and to put in a door from some places that I could get the wood and the door for free. The plaster itself was relatively inexpensive. I built the desk myself. I did the painting myself, and I put it all together pretty much myself. But I did a couple of things to help optimize the audio quality of the room. Now, this isn't a structure that I constructed from scratch myself. I actually just built it at the end of my garden shed. So I just put in a wall, put in plaster, and it's its own room now. But I did some things to make sure that the space was as appropriate for audio as possible. One of the major things you can do if you have the advantage of building your audio space from scratch is really efficiently insulate insulating the room. I found some acoustic grade insulation, which is, as you might have guessed, a little more expensive than cheap insulation, but really does a much better job. I also triple insulated the ceiling. That's an area which is often underestimated as far as soundproofing goes. The result is a small room at the back of my property that has some thick insulation between this room and the outside, which means not much sound gets in. As for the room itself, before I acoustically treated it, it was the most echoey space I've ever been in. There was a hard, shiny, flat surface on every corner, and there were no objects interrupting the sound, so it was actually quite fun to sort of be in and hear the sound bounce around. But of course, when you want to use a space for audio, that's not quite fun anymore. This is acoustic foam I bought from eBay. I got 2 packs of 40 and I think it cost me about 60 bucks per pack, and that did this entire room, almost every wall in the room. And you can even do fun fancy stuff by using just an electric knife carver. You can cut shapes in the foam, and I made a cool hexagon pattern on the back of my wall, which I like because it's visually a bit more fun. But the effect is the same, and then that combined with the carpet and the bass traps provide a really nice sound absorption for the bounce in this room. It's not perfect, it's still a very budget sound studio, but I actually have a small sound studio, and you can do this with a limited budget as long as you're creative and put in a bit of hard work. One final note on creating your own acoustically treated sound space: the goal is not removing all bounce from the room. If you have a thickly carpeted room with foam covering every single crevice of the room and every flat surface, including the ceiling, the result is going to be actually a very dead sounding room, and your audio is actually going to suffer from that because you're going to a different extreme. What you need to aim for is an acoustically neutral sound in the room. Find a nice middle ground, but err on the side of more absorption than less, because it's better to be able to add that later in post-production if you have to, rather than being stuck with an echoey, reverb-heavy environment that the audio is recorded in. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived to the secret weapon of voiceover artists and voice actors all around the world. It's an amazingly budget-effective version of a sound studio, and it's a wardrobe. The reason this can be an effective sound environment, particularly if you're working with a studio condenser microphone close to your voice, is that you have an effectively soundproof room and acoustically treated environment without having spent a penny. It's soundproof because you're in a room, inside a house, which gives you 3 levels of isolation from the outside world. So unless there are noisy things happening directly outside of your closet or wardrobe, you're actually going to have a really nice isolated sound. On top of that, because the room is lined with cloth and clothes and thick plushy things, you end up with a really nice acoustic treatment because the sound isn't going to bounce around, but it's also not going to be completely dead. If you have a scenario in which you have one wall of clothes and a hard surface like a door here, you can do what I've done, which is just hang a cloth or a blanket from it, and that avoids sound bouncing from that hard surface and also creates a little bit more of a symmetrical sound. And this is ideal, especially if you want to get into something like voice acting or do cartoon voices for your own projects, because then all you need to worry about is getting a reasonable mic, not even something overly expensive, and you already have the perfect environment to record in. There are 2 obvious problems with this in other scenarios though. One is that I couldn't appropriately host a how to draw YouTube channel inside my closet, which is why I have a studio which isn't perfectly acoustically focused, but it's balanced enough. But the other problem that comes into play, of course, can be temperature and, in some cases, oxygen. So if you're recording for decent periods of time in an environment like this, I recommend stepping out every 15 to 20 minutes, taking a few breaths of solid fresh air, and making sure that you allow your body heat to escape before you let it build up again. It can be tricky in summer and in the hotter seasons because obviously you're going to build up a lot of body sweat and the room will hold that heat. So be very careful about that, but the advantage on the flip side is that in the colder months and in winter, you can snuggle up with some nice cushy warm things and blankets as they're in your environment already. So that brings us to the end of this video on optimizing your space for audio recordings. I really hope it's been useful to you, both for people who are trying to do presenter work, whether it be vlogs or podcasts or YouTube channels and tutorials, and then also for people doing specifically creative projects, whether it be voiceovers and character voices for animations, and so on and so forth. Once again, thank you to Rode for sponsoring this video and providing me with these microphones. I highly recommend you check out their products. They have a huge range of diverse and quality products. Otherwise, that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure to watch the other videos in this 3-part series on getting the best sound possible for your productions. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for new content every week. If you want to support my work and get some goodies for yourself, head over to my store for archives, ebooks, digital brushes, video courses, and more. If you enjoyed this video, here's a link to some more content you might like. Draw with Jazza is proudly sponsored by Adobe. Join the Creative Cloud today and get loads of incredible industry-standard creative tools such as Photoshop, Animate, Premiere Pro, and other apps for your computer or mobile device. That's it for now. Thanks for joining the arty party, and until next time, I'll see you later.